I still remember the way he said it. Cold. Distant. Like reading from a script he didn't care about. "Sarah, we're going in a new direction. Your role has been eliminated." 22 years of my life, wrapped up in one sentence. I sat there, in that glass-walled office I helped design, staring at a man half my age pretending to make a tough decision. He didn't even look at me. He just slid the envelope across the table, like I was some stranger who had overstayed her welcome. My heart sank, but I didn't say a word. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I walked out of that office holding my dignity, even when everything inside me felt shattered. I'd given that company my best years, missed birthdays, stayed late for deadlines, covered mistakes my bosses made, mentored new hires, and built systems that made them millions. And now, suddenly I was no longer needed. Just like that, what stung the most wasn't being fired. It was who replaced me. Emma, the intern I trained just months earlier. The same young woman who used to come to me nervous about presentations and call me Sarah ma'am out of respect. She was bright, yes, but inexperienced, unpolished, and far from ready to manage the role I had perfected for decades. And yet, they handed it to her. Because she was fresh, innovative, and most importantly, cheaper. I could still hear the HR director's rehearsed voice echoing, "It's not personal, Sarah, it's a business decision." Business decision. Those words stayed with me, burning deep. I had heard them used before, to justify layoffs, budget cuts, and selfish choices. But now they were my reality. The same woman who helped others through these moments was now living it herself. I packed my office quietly, every photo and file reminding me of the years I gave to build something meaningful. I even smiled when a few coworkers whispered, "I'm so sorry," or "You didn't deserve this." But once the door closed behind me, I finally let myself cry. Not because I lost a job, but because I realized I had been loyal to people who saw me as disposable. The first few weeks after losing my job were heavy. I'd wake up early, still half expecting to check emails or prepare reports. My routine felt empty. I questioned everything. Was I too old, too slow, too loyal? My friends tried to comfort me, saying, "It's their loss," but it didn't feel that way. It felt like mine. One afternoon, I decided to stop feeling sorry for myself. I sat down with a notebook and wrote, "What now?" It was a question I had avoided for too long. I realized that for years, I'd been helping others grow, teaching them strategies, solving their problems, managing crises, and yet I never built anything for myself. I gave them my skills, my creativity, my energy, and in return they gave me a pink slip. That's when something inside me shifted. I didn't know what my next step was, but I knew it would no longer be about pleasing others. It would be about proving to myself that I still had value, that experience, loyalty, and wisdom still mattered in a world obsessed with young and cheap. Meanwhile, rumors started to spread through my old office. Apparently, things weren't going so well with the new boss and his brilliant intern. Deadlines were missed. Clients were unhappy. Mistakes were piling up. Emma, my replacement, was struggling under the weight of responsibilities she didn't understand. And the same boss who looked me in the eye and told me I was outdated was now scrambling to fix the mess he created. But I didn't gloat. Not yet, because I had something better in mind. A few weeks later, I started freelancing. Small projects at first, consulting for local businesses, helping startups organize their teams, offering strategies that I once shared in boardrooms for free. The work felt different this time. It was mine. Every success, every client, every late night mine. And slowly, my reputation started to grow. Word spread that Sarah from the old firm was the one who actually made things work. 3 months passed. I was sitting in a cafe, laptop open, working on a proposal for a new client, when I received an email. The sender's name made me pause. It was from the same company that had fired me. The same boss. The subject line read, "Urgent consulting request." I couldn't help but smile. Apparently, the company had lost 2 major clients because of poor performance. They were desperate for help, my help. The irony was delicious. The man who had replaced me with a cheaper intern was now reaching out, hoping I could fix what he broke. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore the message entirely. Another part wanted to say yes, just to see his face when he realized how wrong he'd been. But most of all, I wanted to do it on my terms. No job titles, no bosses, no false promises, only respect. I replied with a short come message. I'm available for consulting. My rate is attached below. A few hours later, he called. His tone was very different this time. Humble, uncertain. Sarah, he said, we could really use your expertise. Things have gotten complicated. I could almost hear the regret in his voice. And behind that regret, the realization that experience can't be replaced by enthusiasm alone. As I listened, I glanced out the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, bright and restless. I thought of how quickly life can turn, how the same people who dismiss you can come running back when they realize what they've lost. I didn't give him an answer right away. I told him I'd think about it, and as I ended the call, I couldn't help but smile again. Because now, the power had shifted. The woman they underestimated was no longer the same, and the storm they never saw coming was already on its way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that email, that voice on the phone, that man who once looked right past me like I was invisible. Now he was the one asking for help. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt that rush of revenge I dreamed about. But instead, all I felt was curiosity and maybe a little hesitation. Was this really about business? Or was there something more going on behind those corporate walls I once called home? The next morning, I made coffee and sat by my window, staring out at the city I had spent my whole career in. Every street seemed to carry a memory. The early mornings when I used to rush to catch the bus, holding folders against my chest. The late nights when I'd leave the office after everyone else, lights flickering above empty desks. I remember the laughter during lunch breaks, the quiet moments before big meetings, and the pride I used to feel walking into that glass building. For 22 years, it was more than a workplace. It was a part of who I was. I decided to meet with him. Not because I owed him anything, but because I needed closure. I wanted to see with my own eyes what became of the company that had thrown me away so easily. So I replied to his message and agreed to a meeting. Just a discussion, I wrote. Nothing official yet. When I walked through those familiar doors 3 days later, everything looked different, and yet, somehow exactly the same. The new reception desk gleamed under the lights, but the air felt tense. A few employees recognized me, offering polite, almost guilty smiles. They looked tired. The warmth that used to fill the place was gone, replaced by quiet whispers and hurried steps. Then I saw him. Mark. My new boss, or rather, the man who once had the power to end my career with a few words. He walked toward me with that same expensive suit and carefully styled hair, but his confidence was gone. His handshake was hesitant. "Sarah," he said softly, "thank you for coming." I noticed how his voice lacked the arrogance it once had. There was something else now, nervousness, maybe even regret. We sat in the conference room, and for the first time, he didn't speak like a superior. He spoke like someone who had realized he was in over his head. He explained the situation. The company had lost 2 major clients, one after another. Projects were delayed, deadlines missed, and internal conflicts were growing. The transition didn't go as smoothly as expected, he admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. I almost smiled. That was his polite way of saying everything was falling apart. And then, as if on cue, the door opened. Emma walked in. My replacement. She froze when she saw me, her eyes wide. She looked different, tired, pale, far less confident than the eager young woman I remembered. "Sarah, I didn't know you'd be here," she said quietly. I just nodded. "Neither did I replied. She took a seat across the table, clutching her notebook like it was a shield. I could sense the tension between her and Mark. He avoided looking at her, and she avoided looking at me. The silence in that room was heavy, filled with everything left unsaid. As the meeting went on, I listened carefully. Mark tried to describe their problems without admitting fault, while Emma filled in the gaps, her voice trembling slightly. They were lost, confused by the very systems I had once managed effortlessly. Files misplaced, clients misinformed, deadlines missed because they didn't understand the structure I built from scratch. Part of me felt sorry for Emma. She wasn't a bad person. She was just young and caught in a game she didn't understand. She had been promised a role she wasn't ready for, used as a cost-saving experiment. The more she spoke, the more I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was just another casualty of bad leadership. When they finally stopped talking, I leaned back in my chair. "So," I said slowly, "you're asking me to fix what you broke." Mark cleared his throat. "We're asking for your guidance," he corrected carefully. "We value your experience." The word almost made me laugh. Experience. The same word they once used as a reason to replace me. I didn't give them an answer that day. Instead, I told them I'd think about it. But as I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was wrong. The tension in that office wasn't just from missed deadlines, it was fear. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when someone walked by. It felt like the soul of the company had been drained. Over the next few days, I did my research. I reached out to a few old contacts, quietly asking questions. What I learned confirmed my suspicion. Since my departure, 3 senior employees had quit, 2 major clients had left, and a potential investor had backed out. The new leadership's obsession with efficiency had turned the workplace toxic. Employees were overworked, underappreciated, and terrified of being the next to go. I began to wonder if coming back, on my terms, wasn't just a chance for me to help them, but an opportunity to uncover what really happened behind my firing. Because the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. My department had been performing perfectly. Clients were happy. Numbers were strong. So why was I suddenly eliminated? The next week, I met with Mark again, this time at a quiet restaurant instead of the office. He seemed relieved that I showed up. He was polite, even friendly, but I could tell he was desperate. He told me they'd be willing to pay my consulting rate, even higher if necessary. I listened, nodded, and then asked one simple question. "Why did you fire me, Mark?" He froze. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he looked down and said, "It wasn't personal, Sarah. It was a decision from above." "Above?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He hesitated. The board wanted change. They wanted someone younger, someone they thought would bring a new image. I was told to make it happen. There it was, the truth I'd suspected but never confirmed. I wasn't let go because of performance. I was let go because I didn't fit their new image of modern success. They wanted someone they could mold, someone who would follow orders without question. And that someone was Emma. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I'd consider his offer. But inside, something started to burn again, not anger this time, but determination. If they thought they could erase me that easily, they were wrong. That night, I opened my old laptop and began writing notes, strategies, contacts, a plan. If I did this, I wouldn't just fix their problems. I'd uncover every truth they tried to hide, every decision that led to this mess, every name behind my firing. And maybe, just maybe, I'd rebuild what they tried to destroy, not for them, but for me. As I looked at the screen, I caught my reflection in the dark glass. For the first time in months, I saw a spark in my own eyes. Not sadness, not fear, but focus, because the storm they never saw coming had just begun to form. 2 weeks later, I walked back into that office, but this time, it wasn't as an employee. I was a consultant now, an outsider brought in to clean up their chaos. My badge said visitor, but I carried myself with the same quiet authority I used to. The staff looked surprised to see me. Some smiled politely, others exchanged curious glances. A few whispered my name like it was a rumor. I could feel their eyes following me as I walked through the hallways I once knew so well. When I stepped into the conference room, Mark was already there, looking tired and older than I remembered. The tension in the air was thick. Emma sat beside him, avoiding eye contact. Her confidence from months ago was gone. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Files were spread all over the table, reports, charts, failed projections. The mess itself told a story. "Thank you for agreeing to help," Mark said quietly. His tone was formal, but there was something uneasy beneath it. "We're in a difficult position. We need your expertise." I nodded, glancing at the papers. "I can see that," I replied simply. They began explaining the situation in detail. Missed deadlines, angry clients, a project that was supposed to launch last month but kept getting delayed. The numbers didn't lie. Everything had been declining since I left. But what caught my attention was how inconsistent the data was. Reports didn't match. Some numbers were missing, and a few documents looked altered. As I flipped through the pages, I asked calmly, "Who's been managing the reports?" Emma's voice was small when she answered, "I have." I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I looked at her. She seemed genuinely nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. She was trying, but it was clear she was overwhelmed. I realized then that she was probably working far beyond her capacity. "It's okay," I said softly. "We'll go through it together." Her shoulders relaxed a little. Mark, on the other hand, seemed restless, almost defensive. He kept glancing at the door, as if he wanted to be anywhere else. That behavior made me suspicious. Over the next few days, I started observing things quietly. I talked to employees in different departments, asked small questions, and watched how people reacted. What I discovered was unsettling. There was a growing disconnect between teams. Some employees blamed leadership, others blamed Emma. Everyone seemed scared to take responsibility. It wasn't just bad management, it was mistrust. Late one evening, I stayed back to review files alone. The office was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of the cleaning staff. As I went through old project folders, I noticed something strange. Several key emails were missing from the shared records. I cross-checked dates, and sure enough, there were gaps, whole weeks of communication erased. I remembered how careful I used to be about documentation. I never left loose ends. Whoever deleted those files wanted to cover something up. I copied what I could onto my flash drive, telling myself it was just for review. But deep down, I knew this was bigger than a few lost clients. The next morning, I confronted Mark gently. "Do you know some records are missing from the internal system?" I asked. He froze for a moment. "Missing? That's impossible," he said too quickly. "Then you won't mind if I look into the access logs," I said, watching his reaction carefully. He forced a smile. "Of course. Whatever you need." But his eyes said something else. Unease, maybe fear. Later that day, Emma came to my desk. "Sarah," she whispered, glancing around nervously, "there's something you should know." She hesitated, then continued. "Some files were deleted before I even got access. I think Mark asked someone from IT to clean up the database, but I don't know why." Her voice trembled as she spoke. It was clear she was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "And don't worry, this stays between us." From that moment on, I started paying even closer attention. Every email, every meeting, every sudden topic change. The more I listened, the more the pieces began to fit together. There had been a deal, one that went wrong right before I was fired. A project involving a large client overseas, something I had been managing successfully until I was abruptly replaced. After that, everything about that deal vanished from the system. One evening, I ran into an old colleague in the parking lot, Daniel, who had left the company a month after me. We hadn't spoken since, but when he saw me, his eyes widened. "Sarah, you're back." "Temporarily," I said with a faint smile. "I'm consulting now." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Be careful. Things aren't what they seem in there." "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked around, lowering his voice. "Let's just say not everyone agreed with how your firing was handled. Some people tried to speak up, and suddenly they were gone too." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. Days passed, and the tension in the office grew thicker. I could feel eyes watching me wherever I went. Some people were relieved I was there, others seemed threatened. Mark became more unpredictable, sometimes overly polite, sometimes distant. Emma kept her head down, working quietly beside me, though I could tell she was afraid of something too. One afternoon, as I was reviewing contracts in my temporary office, I found a printed document that didn't belong to any of the current projects. It was marked confidential, with a date from just before my termination. The project name was familiar, one of the biggest accounts I had handled before everything changed. I flipped through the pages and froze when I saw the signatures. Mark's name was there, but mine wasn't, though it should have been. It looked like someone had replaced my approval with his, finalizing a deal I was never informed about. It started to make sense now. The board didn't fire me because of new direction. They fired me because someone needed to cover up a mistake. A costly one, And firing me was easier than admitting fault. That night, I went home exhausted but determined. I knew I couldn't confront anyone yet, not without proof. But one thing was certain, this was no longer about getting my job back. It was about uncovering the truth. The next morning, Emma came into my office, holding a folder close to her chest. "Sarah, I found something," she whispered, glancing at the door nervously. It was hidden in the old archive system. She handed me the folder. Inside were printed copies of emails, messages between Mark and a client discussing project changes that had never been recorded officially. Some even mentioned financial adjustments that didn't align with the company's policies. Emma looked terrified. "If they find out I took these, I'll lose my job." I met her eyes. "You did the right thing," I said. "Now we just need to be careful." As she left, I locked the folder in my drawer, my heart pounding. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. Someone had manipulated records, silenced objections, and used my firing as a smokescreen. And now, unknowingly, I was walking right back into the storm they created. That evening, as the office lights dimmed, I sat alone at my desk staring at the city skyline. Everything was quiet, but my mind was racing. For the first time, I realized that what started as a personal loss was becoming something far more dangerous. And deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even begun yet. The next few days passed like a blur, every moment heavy with quiet tension. I worked in silence, pretending everything was normal, while beneath the surface, I was piecing together the fragments of a truth that no one wanted uncovered. Each file I opened, each conversation I overheard, added another layer to the growing storm around me. The evidence in Emma's folder had been enough to confirm what I already suspected. Mark wasn't just careless, he was hiding something that could destroy the company. I started arriving early and leaving late, using the quiet hours to access archive systems and review contracts no one else dared to touch. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Someone had been moving funds between projects, altering invoices, and forging approvals. My name had appeared on several reports I had never written. They hadn't just fired me to replace me, they had used me as a cover. One evening, as the office emptied and the building grew silent, I stayed behind, scrolling through old backups. The glow of the computer screen cast faint reflections on the window, where the city lights blinked like distant stars. Suddenly, I found it, an email chain from months before I was fired. It showed that a major client had raised concerns about misused funds. The message had been forwarded to Mark, but instead of reporting it to the board, he deleted it and arranged a quiet deal to resolve the issue. That resolution included changing project details and replacing me, the one who had direct access to the client records. My hands trembled slightly as I printed out the emails and tucked them into my bag. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew I had to be careful. If Mark realized how much I knew, he'd find a way to silence me again. The next morning, Mark seemed nervous. He avoided my eyes in meetings, his voice cracking slightly when he spoke. Emma noticed it too. She sent me a quick message from across the table. "He knows something." I didn't respond, but I felt it. The air in the room was heavier than usual, filled with unspoken tension. Later that day, as I stepped into the elevator, Mark suddenly joined me. The doors closed behind us, and the silence felt sharp. "You've been busy lately," he said casually, his tone hiding something underneath. "Just doing my job," I replied, keeping my voice even. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've always been thorough. That's what we respected about you." He paused, leaning slightly closer. "Just be careful not to dig too deep into things that don't concern you anymore." The elevator bell rang, and before I could answer, the doors opened. He walked out, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. It was no longer just professional tension, it was a warning. That night, I couldn't shake his words. "Don't dig too deep." That meant I was close, closer than he wanted me to be. But if he thought intimidation would stop me, he clearly hadn't learned anything. For 22 years, I had carried this company on my back. I had survived every change, every storm. I wasn't about to back down now. I called Emma and asked her to meet me at a small cafe away from the office. When she arrived, her eyes darted around nervously before sitting down. "I think Mark suspects I helped you," she whispered. "He asked IT to check recent file access." I took a deep breath. "Then we need to be faster," I said. I showed her the printed emails. Her eyes widened as she read. He was covering up missing funds. The client tried to raise the alarm, but he made it disappear. Emma looked shocked. "If this gets out, it'll ruin him." "That's the point," I said quietly. "But I can't go to the board without solid proof. They'll protect him unless I can show everything: dates, transactions, communications." Over the next few days, Emma and I worked in secret. We stayed late, pretending to finalize reports, while we quietly gathered backups and screenshots. Every click, every document, felt like walking a tightrope over fire. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Mark had used company money to cover losses from a failed side deal. To hide it, he blamed my department and quietly removed me before the audits began. One night, as we were reviewing one last folder, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Emma froze. The office was supposed to be empty. The sound grew closer, the distinct rhythm of shoes against tile. I quickly shut the laptop, whispering, "Don't say a word." The door opened slightly, and a shadow appeared. It was Mark. He stepped inside slowly, his expression unreadable. "Working late again?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp. His gaze moved between me and Emma, resting briefly on the closed laptop. "You two seem busy." I smiled faintly, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Just reviewing old reports, trying to help fix what's broken." He didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes trying to fix things can break them even more." Then he turned back, giving a small, tight smile. "Go home, Sarah. You've done enough for one day." When he left, Emma let out a shaky breath. "He knows," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but now it's too late for him to stop it." The next morning, an email arrived in my inbox from an anonymous sender. It contained a single line: "You're not the only one who knows." Attached was a document, more proof. It detailed payments and signatures linking Mark's actions to someone higher up in the board. It wasn't just him. He was covering for someone else. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about one man's greed. It was about corruption rooted deep inside the company. And I had just become a threat to all of them. That day, I noticed whispers in the office. People stopped talking when I walked by. My access to certain files suddenly disappeared. Emma's badge stopped working for the archive room. IT said it was a glitch, but we both knew better. Someone was tightening control. By evening, I packed my things quietly, deciding to take work home for safety. As I left, I glanced back at the glass building glowing under the city lights. It looked calm from the outside, but inside, I could feel the panic building. They were scared, and that meant I was close to something big. At home, I spread out the documents on my desk, connecting every piece like a puzzle. My walls were covered with notes and timelines. The pattern was undeniable now: forged approvals, missing funds, fake audits, and the sudden firing that started it all. Everything pointed to one final project, one that was about to be presented to investors in a week. A project built on lies. As I sat there in the quiet, the weight of it all hit me. I had spent my life building this company's reputation, and now I was watching it rot from the inside. I knew what I had to do next, but it wouldn't be easy. The truth would destroy more than just Mark's career. It could bring down the entire leadership. I picked up the phone and called Emma. "It's time," I said simply. There was silence for a moment, then her voice came through softly. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I whispered. "They wanted a storm. Let's give them one." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, faint but steady. The sky darkened, and the city lights flickered like they knew something was coming. I looked out the window, my heart steady now. Everything was leading to this moment: the truth, the lies, the betrayal. The calm before the storm was almost over. And when it broke, nothing would ever be the same again. The storm that night wasn't just outside, it was brewing inside me too. Thunder cracked across the sky as I sat at my desk, every sound echoing the tension that had been building for weeks. I stared at the scattered papers and files, my mind racing through every possibility. Tomorrow, the board would meet to approve the new project, the one built on lies. This was my moment. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still didn't add up. There was one missing piece, one thread I hadn't pulled yet. Around midnight, I got a message from an unknown number. It read, "You don't know the full story. Check your old inbox." My heart stopped for a second. I hadn't accessed my old company email since the day they fired me. They had deactivated it almost immediately. But curiosity won over fear. I logged in using a backup password I'd created years ago, one no one else knew. To my surprise, the account opened. There it was, a hidden folder buried deep in the archives. Dozens of unread messages, all marked from internal compliance. The earliest was dated 2 weeks before my firing. I clicked one open, and as I read, my stomach turned. The email wasn't about misperformance or department changes, like they had told me. It was a warning. Someone inside the company had flagged financial irregularities under Mark's department and listed my name as the only person with access to those accounts. They had used my credentials to process unauthorized transfers. The realization hit like a wave. I hadn't just been replaced, I had been framed. They hadn't fired me because of new direction or image, they had fired me to bury the evidence. My termination had been their cover-up. I scrolled through more emails, each confirming the same pattern. Fake approvals, hidden audit notes, and deleted chains, all pointing to a setup designed to make it look like I was responsible for missing funds. And the worst part, the order hadn't come from Mark alone. It had been signed off by someone even higher, one of the board members, a name I never thought I'd see there. It was Linda Porter, the same woman who once called me her most trusted manager, who gave speeches about loyalty and ethics. She was the one who initiated my dismissal, all while quietly protecting the very fraud I had uncovered years earlier without realizing it. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of betrayal sink in. The story had just changed completely. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about survival. Because now, I wasn't just the woman they underestimated. I was the one who could expose everything. And that made me dangerous. The next morning, I met Emma in a quiet corner of a small cafe. Her eyes widened as I showed her the printed emails. "They framed you," she whispered, barely able to believe it. "Yes," I said softly. "And if they find out I know, they'll come after both of us." She looked down, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. "What are we going to do?" I thought for a moment before answering. "We get proof. Real proof. Something they can't erase, can't deny, and can't spin." For the next 2 days, we worked in secret, hiding our moves behind ordinary tasks. I asked casual questions during meetings, watched who avoided my eye, who looked too nervous when the word audit came up. Slowly, I began connecting the dots between Mark, Linda, and 2 other senior executives. They had all signed off on the same project that went missing from the records. It wasn't just about stolen money, it was about power, reputation, and control. By the 3rd day, I felt close to the truth. Too close. That evening, as I packed up my laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Don't come to the office tomorrow. Something's wrong." I called her immediately, but she didn't answer. Panic crawled through my chest. I sent her another message, then another, but there was no reply. The next morning, I arrived early, ignoring her warning. The office felt eerily quiet, even for that hour. When I reached Emma's desk, it was empty, her computer gone, her drawers cleared. HR said she had resigned suddenly. I didn't believe it for a second. Mark appeared behind me, his voice calm but sharp. "I told you not to dig too deep, Sarah." I turned to face him. "What did you do to her?" He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. People make choices. Sometimes they realize this place isn't for them. I took a step closer, my voice steady. And sometimes they realize too much. He didn't respond, just stared at me with that same cold expression I remembered from the day he fired me. "You've done enough damage. Maybe it's time to move on again." I walked away without another word, but my mind was racing. If Emma was gone, that meant they knew she was helping me. And if they knew about her, then they probably knew what we'd found. I needed to act fast. That night, I packed all the evidence, the emails, reports, contracts, and backed up every file onto an encrypted drive. I knew I couldn't keep it at home, it was too risky. I hid it inside an old safety box at a friend's shop under a different name. Just as I locked it, my phone rang again, this time a blocked number. "Sarah," a voice whispered. "It's me. It was Emma. Where are you?" I asked, relieved and afraid all at once. "I can't talk long," she said quickly. "They know everything. Someone from the board found out we've been collecting files. I think they're watching the servers. Don't trust anyone." Before I could respond, the call cut off. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. The next day, chaos erupted in the company. Mark didn't show up for work. Rumors spread that there was an emergency board meeting. The corridors buzzed with quiet fear. Something had shifted. That's when I received an official email, this time from Linda Porter herself. "Sarah," it read, "we need to speak. Urgently. Come to my office at 6 p.m. alone." I stared at the message, my hands cold. Linda had never contacted me directly before. Why now? Was it a trap? Or was she desperate to control the situation before it exploded? At 6 p.m., I walked into her office. The door closed softly behind me. She stood by the window, her posture composed but tense. "You've been busy," she said without turning around. I said nothing. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're smart, Sarah. Always have been. But you're playing a dangerous game. You don't understand how deep this goes." "Then explain it to me," I said firmly. She sighed, walking closer. "There are things in motion you can't stop. You think Mark is the problem? He's just a piece of it. If this comes out, the company collapses. Hundreds of jobs lost. Careers destroyed. Do you really want that on your conscience?" Her voice was calm, persuasive, the same tone she'd used for years to make people trust her. But I could see the fear behind her eyes. "You're not trying to save jobs," I said quietly. "You're trying to save yourself." For a brief moment, her mask slipped. Her expression hardened. "You always were too honest for your own good." The lights flickered for a second as thunder rolled outside again. We stood in silence. Two people who once believed in the same vision but were now standing on opposite sides of it. Finally, she spoke again, her tone sharp and final. "Walk away, Sarah. Delete whatever you found, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." I looked her straight in the eye. "You fired me once. You don't get to silence me twice." She smiled faintly. "Then you better be ready for what comes next." As I walked out of her office that night, I knew there was no turning back. I wasn't just fighting for my name anymore, I was fighting for the truth. And if they thought they could bury it, they hadn't seen the real storm yet. Outside, the rain poured harder, streaking against the glass walls of the building. The city lights blurred through the downpour, and in that moment, I knew something had shifted forever. Because sometimes, the only way to expose corruption is to walk straight into it. The following morning, I woke up with a strange calm inside me, the kind that comes when fear finally runs out of places to hide. I knew that day would decide everything. For weeks, I had been living in shadows, collecting truths that others tried to bury. But it was time to bring light into the room. I opened my laptop, double-checked the evidence I had gathered, and sent a secure message to one of the investigative journalists who had been quietly helping me piece things together. The files were encrypted, time-stamped, and impossible to erase. Even if they came after me, the truth was already in motion. By noon, the company's boardroom was tense. Everyone had been called in for an emergency meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't even work there anymore, but I walked in anyway, my head held high. The room went silent. Linda looked up from her seat, eyes narrowing slightly, while the other executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "Sarah," she said, voice calm but strained, "you shouldn't be here." "Actually," I replied, setting a folder on the table, "I think I should." I opened the folder slowly, revealing printed emails, bank records, and screenshots of internal transactions. "You told everyone I was fired because my position was eliminated," I said, my tone steady. "But these documents prove otherwise. They show how you and Mark used my credentials to authorize unauthorized fund transfers. You framed me to cover your tracks." The room erupted in murmurs. One of the board members leaned forward, scanning the pages with wide eyes. Linda's face turned pale, though she tried to maintain her composure. "These accusations are absurd," she snapped. "Where did you even get this?" "I didn't need to steal anything," I said quietly. "You left the truth hidden in the same system I once managed. You just didn't think I'd come back to look for it." At that exact moment, the door opened, and to everyone's shock, Mark walked in. He looked disheveled, his usual confidence replaced with visible fear. "Linda," he said shakily, "it's over. They know." She froze. "What are you talking about?" He turned toward the rest of the board. "I confessed," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I gave the investigators everything. The fake invoices, the offshore accounts, all of it. Sarah's telling the truth. She was never part of this." The room went completely still. Linda's eyes filled with fury. "You betrayed me," she hissed. Mark stepped back, avoiding her gaze. "I should have stopped this when we fired her. But I was too scared. You said it was temporary, that it would be handled. I didn't know it would go this far." I stood there, watching the walls of lies finally crumble. Linda tried to defend herself, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence spoke louder than her words. One of the board members quietly stepped out to make a call, to the authorities, I assumed. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. But just when I thought it was over, Linda turned toward me with an eerie calm. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said softly. "You think truth fixes everything? You'll see how fast they replace you again once the headlines fade. People like you are only useful until they're inconvenient." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they came from someone who once inspired me. She didn't fight for the company anymore. She fought only to save herself. 2 security officers entered the room moments later, escorting her and Mark out. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mix of victory and sorrow. The board apologized to me, offering reinstatement and a formal public statement clearing my name. But as I looked around the room, I realized I didn't belong there anymore. The company had changed, and so had I. I didn't want to return to a place built on silence and fear. I wanted something real, something that couldn't be taken away by one powerful signature. So I thanked them politely, gathered my things, and walked out for the last time. The air outside felt lighter than I remembered. The same building that once represented my entire life now looked smaller, almost fragile. I thought about all those years I'd given, every late night, every sacrifice, and how easily they tried to erase it. But in the end, I had reclaimed my story. That was something no one could take away. 3 months later, I was sitting in a small co-working cafe downtown, working on a new project. The journalist I'd partnered with had published a detailed exposé about the company's corruption. It had gone viral, forcing a full investigation and saving hundreds of employees from layoffs that had been planned under Linda's watch. She and Mark were now facing serious legal consequences. Still, part of me felt uneasy, like the story wasn't quite over. One afternoon, while I was reviewing proposals for a small consultancy I had started, I received a message from an unknown email. It had only one line: "You did well, but not everyone was caught." Attached was a document showing new offshore accounts, recent ones. My heart raced as I scrolled through the details. The names were different this time, but the methods were the same. Someone else from the board had quietly picked up where Linda left off. I sat back in my chair, realizing the fight wasn't finished, it had just shifted. The system wasn't broken because of one person, it was built that way. And maybe, just maybe, that was why people like me were meant to keep standing up. The cafe door opened, and Emma walked in with a bright smile. "You're still at it," she teased, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. "Always," I said with a small laugh. "Turns out justice is a full-time job." She grinned. "Then let's make sure the next one never sees us coming." As we clinked our coffee cups together, I looked out at the city skyline, glowing against the sunset. The storm had passed, but its memory would always remind me that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of finding light. And in that moment, I knew the woman they fired had become someone they could never silence again. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet, like the world was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing through crowded hallways or juggling endless meetings. There were no urgent emails, no impossible deadlines, no one watching my every move. Just peace. Yet even in that calm, I often found myself looking back, at the office that once felt like home, at the people who betrayed me, and at the lessons I had learned in the hardest way possible. It's funny how 22 years of loyalty can vanish overnight, but the strength you find afterward can last a lifetime. Losing that job wasn't the end. It was the beginning of rediscovering who I really was without titles, without fear, without the need to prove my worth to people who never truly saw it. I had built so much of my identity around that company that I forgot life existed outside its walls. Now, every morning felt like a second chance to rebuild on my own terms. Emma became my closest ally during that time. We started working together on small consulting projects, helping local businesses navigate the same kind of corporate traps we had escaped from. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every client we helped reminded me that work could have purpose again, that you didn't need to climb someone else's ladder to feel accomplished. Emma often joked that we had become the calm after the corporate storm. And in many ways, she was right. Still, the past had its way of resurfacing. The journalist's exposé had shaken the corporate world more than anyone expected. The story of how a loyal employee had been fired, framed, and later cleared of all wrongdoing became a topic of national conversation. People reached out from everywhere, strangers who saw themselves in my story, people who had been replaced, overlooked, or silenced for speaking the truth. Some just wanted to say thank you for standing up when it mattered. Others wanted advice on how to begin again after losing everything. Reading their messages made me realize something powerful. I wasn't alone. None of us were. For every voice silenced, there were hundreds more ready to rise. That realization gave me a new mission, to turn my experience into something that could help others rebuild. So I started writing. Late nights, early mornings in coffee shops and train stations, I poured my story onto paper, the betrayal, the pain, the lessons, and the healing. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted reflection. I wanted to turn my scars into someone else's roadmap. Months later, when the book finally got published, I didn't expect it to reach many people. But within weeks, messages started pouring in again, this time from readers who said it gave them hope. It wasn't about success or money anymore. It was about resilience. About learning that sometimes, the very thing that breaks you is what sets you free. One afternoon, I received a letter that stopped me cold. It was from Mark, the man who had once been the symbol of everything that went wrong. He was serving time for his role in the scandal, but his words carried something unexpected remorse. He wrote that my courage had forced him to see what he had become, how easily he had traded his integrity for security. "You were right," he wrote. "It's never too late to choose truth. Thank you for reminding me of that." I didn't know how to feel at first. Anger, sadness, forgiveness. But as I read his words again, I realized that closure doesn't always come from apologies. Sometimes, it comes from knowing you've already moved past the pain that once controlled you. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and let it be a reminder of how far I had come. Linda, on the other hand, disappeared from the public eye after the trial. Rumors said she left the country. Others said she tried to start over under a different name. But I didn't care to know the truth anymore. Her choices were hers to live with. Mine were finally my own. Life took on a new rhythm. I spent mornings at the cafe with Emma, afternoons mentoring young women stepping into the corporate world, and evenings walking through the park near my apartment. The same city that once felt suffocating now felt alive again. Every face, every conversation reminded me that endings aren't failures, they're turning points. Sometimes I'd see old colleagues around town. A few would stop to talk, apologizing for staying silent back then, for not defending me when things fell apart. I never held it against them. Fear makes people quiet. I understood that now. What mattered was that we all learned from it. One evening, while closing my laptop after a long day, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked nothing like the one who was fired months ago. Her eyes held something new. Peace, confidence, maybe even pride. I smiled softly. The company had taken my job, my security, and almost my dignity, but it couldn't take my spirit. And then, one unexpected message changed everything again. It was from the new CEO of the same company that had once fired me. He wrote that the board had been completely restructured, that they wanted to rebuild the culture from the ground up. He offered me a position, not as an employee, but as a consultant to help reshape their values, to make sure what happened to me could never happen again. For a long time, I just stared at the message. Part of me wanted to say no immediately, to leave the past buried. But another part of me, the part that believed in redemption, saw something different. Maybe this was the final chapter, Not revenge, not victory, but balance. So, after a few days of thinking, I agreed. Not for the title, not for recognition, but for the chance to make change where it mattered. Walking back into that building months later felt surreal. The walls were the same, the floors still echoed with the same sound of hurried footsteps, but everything else had changed. People greeted me with warmth, respect, and gratitude. The fear that once ruled the place had finally been replaced by honesty. When I left the office that day, I knew this was the real ending. Not the day they fired me, not the day the truth came out, but the day I walked in not as their victim, but as their example. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I thought back to the night it all began, to the storm outside my window, to the message that changed everything, to the feeling of being lost after losing something I thought defined me. And then I smiled, because now I understood what that storm had meant. It wasn't destruction. It was cleansing. Life has a strange way of tearing things down just to rebuild them stronger. Sometimes it's your career, sometimes it's your confidence, but the purpose is always the same, to remind you who you are without the noise. So, when people ask me how it felt to lose everything after 22 years, I tell them the truth. It hurt. It broke me for a while. But it also freed me. Because losing what I thought was my whole world made me realize the world is much bigger than any single job, any single title, or any single betrayal. And as I walked home that evening, the city lights reflecting in puddles from a light rain, I felt it deeply. This was not just an ending. It was proof that even after the darkest storms, there's always light waiting to be found. The woman they fired was gone. The one who walked away had finally found her place again, and this time, she wasn't afraid of losing it.